Okay, every pony, I did not receive as many auditions as I would have needed, and all of them were male. So, yeah, I'm reading this myself. I know I was offered help with this story, but I also wanted to use this audition thing to see how much this story was wanted. I mean, how many people actually were willing to get involved in the production of this. So, yeah, now I know, actually 3 people. So, without further ado, let's get started. New Trottland Yard, Silver Cross and the Murder of Dancing Cross. Dancing Cross was sitting behind her desk, filling out reports and working on a new training schedule for the newest batch of recruits. She hated having to do this kind of work, especially when the rest of her flight was still fighting at the border to the Changeling Empire. Her CEO's reasons for assigning her for this job were groundless accusations born from a grudge another high-ranking officer held against her. He had offered her to take care of her needs while they were in the field, and she had responded to his offer by turning around and giving him a good example why no pony wanted to spar with her anymore. It had been a miracle that one of her squad mates had been able to pull her off of the poor stallion. She had no interest in Stallion anyways, but some of the other soldiers, like this officer, thought that any mare in the service craved a good plowing, as they called it. Sighing, Dancing put down the stack of reports she had been signing. Most of the Pegasizer higher-ups had sent her to train were far from ready for combat. Nonetheless, the Equestrian High Command wanted them cleared for the front lines in only a few weeks' time. The Changeling air superiority was only due to their numbers. Dancing had killed thousands of them just because she and her comrades could outfly them. And such skills came with years or at least months of training. A few weeks simply weren't enough for these rookies to suddenly evolve into a competent fighting force. Every time the green mare with the orange mane and tail thought about this, her heart started to hurt. A knock at her door shook Dancing out of her reverie. "Come in," she said, pushing the documents she had been working on aside and stealing a glance at the one and only picture on her desk. It was a photograph of herself embracing a pure white earth pony mare, with a black mane and tail. Both of them were smiling happily while a little green Pegasus filly poked her head into the picture from below. It had been made during her last visit to her brother in Destiny, shortly before she had to return to her own time. A black stallion with a grey mane came trotting into her office, saluting smartly as he took position in front of her desk. "Recruit Hammerswing, why aren't you training?" Dancing asked, hard-pressed to keep her annoyance out of her voice. This day was just getting better and better. "Ma'am, I want to request that my flight is reassigned to the front lines," the young buck said, locking eyes with her. Dancing allowed her eyebrows to meet. "Why? You're only here for 4 days. Your training is far from finished," she demanded, already preparing herself for one of those "we are more than ready" speeches so many recruits had tried to convince her with. She was not disappointed, which disappointed her in a way. The young stallion was going on about his flight beating all the other recruits in battle, and that he himself was the best shot in this particular batch of recruits. It was frustrating. She had reviewed Hammer's results just before the buck had come in. 3 of 10 shots weren't exactly dream results. Not to mention that he had been a weather Pegasus before all of this. He was hardly ready for the front lines, but she got at least one group leader who was overconfident in each batch of recruits. His misfortune, however, was that she was in an extremely bad mood today. She had wanted to visit Silver Cross again, but with her duties as an instructor, Dancing didn't have the opportunity to slip away for a few hours. His predecessors had been lucky. They had just received a telling off. Dancing Cross knew that it was unbecoming of a lady to vent her anger on some pony who didn't do anything to offend her, but he was a convenient target. Standing up from behind her desk, she flared out her wings for what felt like the first time in 1,000 years. "So, if I get you right, recruit, you want me to sanction your transfer to the front lines? To give my signature to your suicide note? Tell you what, if you and your team can beat me in an aerial combat, I'll sign. Heck, I'll even write you a recommendation. But if you fail, you and your group will be on latrine duty for the rest of your stay here. Do you still want to be transferred?" She barked at him, a part of her wishing that he would back down. Instead, he didn't even give it a second thought as he nodded. Dancing folded her wings back to her sides, sighing. "All right, assemble your flight on the training grounds in 15 minutes. I just hope you know what you just agreed to." With another salute, the stallion turned on his hooves and trotted back out. From his slightly wobbly movements, Dancing Cross could tell that she had shaken his confidence quite a bit, but he was still not willing to give in. Dancing Cross shot through the abandoned town, which's inhabitants had been wiped out by changelings. 2 of the 6 members of Hammerswing's flight were already being tended to by the medical staff. Taking out the 2 stallions had been much too easy. In her first flyby, she had bucked at the wing of one of the stallions, dropping him. The second had actually thrown a grenade at her, which she had sent back at him with a powerful flap of her wings. To her surprise, it hadn't been a training model but a live one. Luckily, the explosion hadn't ripped the stallion apart. The shockwave had simply knocked him out of the sky. Hammer had actually brought live ammunition to this fight. A small hole in her flank was a testament for that. Oh, how pissed she now was. Using the powers of her cross, Dancing accelerated past anything she would have been able to achieve without its magic. There, only a block ahead, was another one of her recruits. A pink mare equipped with a sniper rifle battle saddle. The bullet from the mare's rifle tore through the air, rushing past Dancing's face and burying itself into her shoulder. The blur of green and orange didn't stop, however. Barreled into the hovering mare, her face distorted into a grimace of anger. Both mares flew through the glass front of a skyscraper, only stopping when the wannabe sniper hit a wall inside the building. She slumped to the ground, her body leaving an indentation in the concrete wall. Dancing reassessed the situation. Now she had been shot twice, and she knew that one of the ponies in Hammer's flight wielded a missile launcher. If that guy hit her... A sound came from her left, and Dancing shot out the way she had come. A second later, the skyscraper went up in flames. The bastard had actually just sacrificed one of his own ponies in an attempt to get her. Dancing Cross pulled out her own rifle, biting down hard on the grip. She had only brought rubber bullets to this exercise, but a well-placed shot to the head would at least knock her opponents out. Her wings flapped hard, and she rose far into the air until the town they had used as a training ground was nothing but a small spot beneath her. Perching on top of a cloud, she flipped up her scope, taking aim at the first of the stallions. It was Hammerswing himself, sitting on top of a building, searching for her with a sniper rifle of his own. He turned his head in the same moment the mare bit down on the trigger, the rubber bullet hitting him squarely between the eyes. "You do realize that this is a total disaster, don't you?" Sweethoof sighed while sitting next to me on the train to Baltimare. Ever since Barry had given her the NTY badge, effectively transferring her to my unit, she was slowly warming up to me again. We had received reports about dozens of incidents involving changelings all over Equestria, and my department was in utter uproar because of it. Apparently, they started acting up all over the place, even those who had been living amongst ponies peacefully. There was just one logical reason for this sudden uprising, and I didn't like it at all. It could mean that the nightmare was preparing her return, and I was still missing 2 crosses. Celestia agreed with my assumption. To be honest, she barely ever shut up, and ponies were already looking at me funny because I started talking to myself. My cross had absorbed her essence in the moment she died, effectively trapping her inside and unlocking all the powers for me. That had been half a year ago, and since then the EIS agents and soldiers in my department refused to train with me. Ever since I, during one such session, nearly incinerated a dozen ponies by accident. The upside to this new power surge was that barely anything was able to touch me anymore if I activated the heat shield. The downside was that I couldn't wear any of my equipment anymore. My forelegs bore twin scars that were shaped like my heat-proof 9mm pistols. They had to cut them out after they had melted into my flesh. Yeah, I know, but we were the only two available agents. The others are all busy trying to get the changeling situation in Las Pegasus, Muzzleton and Manhattan under control. I replied, throwing a look at Sweet Potato, who lay on the seat next to me. I had wanted to leave her in Canterlot, but that had led to another small incident. I had barely left the compound under the main NTY building when she had shot out of the elevator shaft like a bullet. Since even Berrywing was in Manhattan to organize our ponies there, I couldn't even leave her in her care. So, in the end, I had walked out of the yard building, a frightened Pegasus filly clinging to my foreleg as if her life depended on it. Hoof had waited for me at the train station, raising an eyebrow at the sight of my daughter, but not commenting otherwise. So what do the reports say exactly? I asked, and Sweethoof took some papers out of her suitcase, rifling through them with her magic. It was always an amazing sight when she did that, due to her light green magical coloration. According to the Baltimare Police Department, several oversized changelings have been spotted, wreaking havoc among the population. Sometimes they even take the form of the legendary Alicorns, which has gained them a small following from the Church of the Alicorns. The mayor declared martial law 2 days ago. That was when we were notified, she informed me. Martial law? Isn't that a little extreme? Not really. They have committed murder, theft and arson. As far as I can see from these reports, the city is in utter turmoil. It's a distraction, I muttered, nibbling on my left forehoof. Sweethoof nodded. I think so too. It's way too obvious and in no means like attacking changelings usually behave. They barely made any attempts to disguise themselves. All attacks were carried out openly. The equestrian military has sent 2 platoons of ponies to subdue them before they even bothered to inform us. Suffice it to say that they lost contact with their forces only minutes after they arrived in the city, Sweethoof surmised, grimacing slightly. I could only agree with her. It was quite possible that all the inhabitants of the city were dead by now. Having seen how ruthless changelings could be, I didn't have much hope that we would still find any living pony. A glance over the sleeping form of my daughter made me feel a pang of guilt once again. I was heading into a war zone and I was bringing a little filly along. Could I be a worse mother? Sweethoof and I had worked on a plan of operation while the train made its way towards Baltimare. We would get off in one of the suburbs and travel the rest by hoof. No need to get off a train only to find ourselves in the middle of a battle, was there? We had to see where to go from there. In the case of a complete infestation, I had the authority to wipe the city off the map. Which was easier said than done, to tell the truth. The only way I had to accomplish such a scale of destruction was to summon up Celestia's heat shield at full power. Seeing as I still wasn't able to control it completely, that seemed like a bad idea altogether. The last time I had used it, it had melted my pistols into my coat and shot everything within 100 hoofs around me. Even the supposedly indestructible walls and floor of the compound under Canterlot had been melted by the heat, and I had found myself in the Canterlot sewers. Even though it hadn't been at full power yet, as Celestia assured me, the destruction it had wrought was incredible. When Sweethoof left to go check on the train's engine, I went over to Sweet Potato and lay down beside her. No matter what happened, I would do everything to keep the little one safe. I was determined to not let a single one of these insects come even close to her. Thank you again for letting me into my vault after hours, Dancing said, flirting a little with the night guard of the bank.
It's really no problem, Miss Cross. You're one of our most honored customers after all.
The brown-ash pony stammered as he closed the door behind the green Pegasus mare and they waved each other goodbye. As soon as the stallion had turned his back on her, Dancing's face darkened and her amber eyes grew cold. This had been way too close for comfort and it was all Broken's fault. After she had subdued her recruits, she had one of the senior unicorn soldiers cast a revelation spell on them. All of them had turned out to be changelings in disguise, sent to get rid of her. The following execution and inquiry had taken up so much time that the bank had already closed by the time she had gotten here. It had been pure luck that she had caught the eye of the night guard on his rounds. Dancing pitied her brother in destiny, but she also hated him. Broken Cross had caused so much pain to her and Silver that she was quite determined to get rid of him as soon as possible. But that was not to be, and she knew it. Her other brother in destiny had to take care of Broken. Her role was to support Silver Cross in every possible way until it was time to pass on the Cadence Cross. She had already arranged everything. Broken Cross could scheme all she wanted, she would never get it. It were these thoughts that dominated her thoughts when a flash of white caught her eye. Dancing looked around, just now noticing that she had wandered aimlessly through the nighttime Baltimare. She didn't even recognize the area she was in, but her military training instantly told her that something wasn't right. Some pony was watching her from the darkness. "I'm in no mood to play games. If you want something, come out," she barked like the drill instructor she was. What came next caught her completely off guard. A white earth pony mare with a black mane and tail stepped out of a dark alley to her right. Her blue eyes bore into Dancing's amber ones as she smiled. "And I thought you would be happy to see me," Silver Cross breathed seductively. We got off the train, Sweethoof carrying our equipment and a collar. I hated to do this to her, but I had fastened a harness to Sweet Potato again, leashing her to my partner. Sweethoof had agreed that it was the best possible option since she was basically useless in a fight and it was a bad idea to take Potato with me. The two of them stayed behind in the suburb of Baltimare, staying in contact with me via a radio. Sweet also convinced me to take a firearm with me. I had agreed reluctantly, still remembering what had happened to my two pistols. I would just have to get rid of the assault carbine if I had to activate my heat shield. Sweet Potato gave me the puppy dog eyes as I rubbed her mane with a hoof. I could tell that she didn't like Sweethoof, and I could also tell that the feeling was mutual, but what other choice did I have? Sweethoof was a genius when it came to analyzing clues, but she was a lousy shot. Not to mention that I didn't want to endanger my daughter any further. This area was relatively safe, or at least that was what our intelligence said. Apparently the changelings didn't leave Baltimare proper, almost as if they were waiting for something or some pony. That thought made me more than uneasy as I made my way towards the city by hoof. The city was a ghost town. There was no sign of life in the streets, no bodies, no blood. The only indication that there had been a struggle were a few burnt-down buildings and a few bullet holes in the walls of a few of them. 5 tanks and 2 troop transporters were the only sign I found that there had been 2 military units here. I was beginning to feel more uneasy still as I didn't even find any feeding pods. It was as if the ponies of Baltimare had simply vanished. Abandoned carriages, purses and other items littered the streets. In some of the apartments I entered, there were still meals on the table. It didn't fit our information at all. From what we had been told, the city was under martial law for days, with battles raging on the streets. What I saw with my own eyes, however, did not support these reports. From what I saw, the changelings had struck faster than any pony could react. They had been dragged away by the thousands, without any pony being able to put up much of a fight. The indication was that there were way more of them in the city than had been reported, and that could only mean one thing. The reports had been tampered with. We had been played like school fillies. I had to get out of the city or take it out by burning it to the ground with Celestia's heat shield at full power. I was standing at the window of an apartment building as I pondered my options. It was then that I saw them, a group of at least 40 changelings standing on the front of a building. Taking the assault carbine from its harness, I screwed on a scope on top of it. The rifle's accuracy over long distances was okay. The only thing that worried me was its range. There was a good chance that my shot would miss its mark, even if I aimed perfectly. "Here goes nothing," I whispered to myself, taking aim at the head of the first changeling. It exploded moments later. The others instantly began to converge on my position. "Sweethoof, get Potato, get on the train, and get the heck out of here! Return to Canterlot, I need backup!" I shouted into my radio as I saw more and more of the bug-like creatures emerge from the surrounding buildings. My rifle roared again and again, taking out one of them with each bullet, but it wasn't enough. With 1 bullet left in the chamber, I slung the carbine back over my neck and summoned Luna's sword. As soon as the magnificent blade appeared in front of me, I jumped out of the window, biting down hard on the hilt while I met my opponents mid-air.
Sweetooth, get Potato, get on the train and get the heck out of here. Return to Canterlot, I need backup,
came Silver Cross's voice over the radio. Sweetooth pondered these orders for a moment. It sounded bad. Really bad. Yet it was hard to think while an over-energetic filly pulled on her neck, trying to escape and fly towards her adopted mother. The unicorn mare looked down at the badge she wore around her neck. It was Silver Cross's badge from their time in the CPD, and the bullet she had fired that night was still embedded in it. A lone tear formed in her eye and rolled down her face.
I guess the nice life is over, huh?
She sighed as green flames engulfed her.
What are you doing here?
Dancing Cross asked as she backed away a step from her favorite brother in destiny. Of course she was glad to see Silver, but there was something wrong here. Silver's cross didn't have the ability to travel through time unless she was in danger and wanted some help. And as it looked right now, she wasn't in any danger whatsoever. Silver didn't stop, coming ever closer to her, not saying another word. Dancing was still trying to figure out what was going on here when her gaze fell upon the cross dangling from her brother's neck. Quick as a lightning bolt, her hoof struck out, hitting Silver in the face and knocking her into a wall. Even though greenish blood flowed from her muzzle, she smiled.
So, you figured it out, have you? And I thought I finally had you,
she snarled as she transformed back into Broken Cross. The crosses are immune to your magic, Broken. You should have thought about that. The green mare chastised the changeling, not lowering her guard for a moment. Dancing was at a disadvantage here, and she knew it. She would lose if she had to fight Broken head-on right now, even though she was confident she could put up a hell of a fight before she fell. While Dancing was still thinking, Broken jumped up and lunged at her. She wasn't as fast as usual, so Dancing was able to avoid being hit by lifting off. Broken pursued her immediately, and the aerial battle was on. The two cross-bearers exchanged blow after blow, Dancing being cautious not to let Broken use her magic. Whenever the changeling tried to channel a spell, she hit her on the horn, disrupting the spell. The green Pegasus was astonished when her brother in destiny transformed into a perfect copy of herself. It was weird for her to zip through the sky, trying to evade attacks from herself, but she managed somehow. Both of them were exhausted as the battle carried on for almost half an hour. It was then that Broken Cross surprised her. Instead of attacking her directly, as she had done before, she pretended to attack from the right, only to change direction in the last second and swooping in to grab her from behind. The Pegasus mare struggled against her attacker as both of them plummeted towards the ground.
If I only had...
Dancing began to think, but never got to finish it. A flash of bright light later, and she could see a mass of changelings in the streets below her. In the middle of it all stood a white mare, emanating waves of heat against any bugs that came too close. That mare jumped from changeling to changeling while still being in mid-air, slashing at them with a blade made of bluish steel. Involuntary time travel. Or had Broken brought her here on purpose? She didn't know, and she didn't care. It was her rescue, and Silver clearly could use a helping hoof too. Dancing redoubled her efforts to escape Broken's grip and was finally able to twist enough to hit her in the face with a hoof. Being stunned momentarily, Broken Cross released Dancing, who immediately spread her wings again and looped around to land another hit on Broken. It was her chance to defeat her, then go and help Silver. But Broken was gone. As she searched the sky for her attacker, Dancing spotted her, diving towards Silver Cross, who had noticed the two of them by now. Her heart dropped and she went into a dive herself to intercept Broken before she reached Silver. She suddenly wished that Shadow was here, or that Silver could use the Lunar Cross to its full potential. Its powers were perfect for big battles like this. I was almost completely covered in greenish blood, the changelings still coming strong at me. At times there were so many that I didn't even see the sky. The only thing that kept them away was the heat my body was emanating. My jaw was already hurting badly from holding a sword for such a long time. Looking up again, I saw that Dancing Cross was diving towards me, a desperate expression on her face. Behind her was another Dancing Cross that looked determined to kill the one in front of her. As Dancing zoomed past me, she screamed for help, and I reacted. The carbine was hot due to the heat shield I was keeping up, but it was nowhere near melting. I brought up the rifle and took aim at her face. A moment before I pulled the trigger, I saw the look of horrified realization in her eyes. My higher thinking suddenly screamed a warning at me. It demanded that I held my fire and investigated which one of them was the original, if any of them was. It reminded me that it was highly out of character for Dancing to actually cry for help. But it was too late. My brain had already given the order for my muzzle to bite down on the trigger. It did as it was instructed. My last bullet rang out, and time seemed to stop as I watched my bullet pierce her left eye and exit the back of her head. It wasn't the gore that made me shiver and tears form in my eyes, however. It was the blood. That brilliant crimson blood that formed a cloud behind her. I screamed. Everything around me became utterly unimportant at that moment as I let my rifle clatter to the floor and jumped towards the closest flying changeling. I used all of the strength that Celestia and Luna provided me with, so I jumped for almost 100 hoofs. The bug was crushed under my hoofs as I changed direction by using it to send me into another direction. My eyes never left the plummeting form of Dancing Cross. I slammed into her mid-air and through the window of an office building. Could barely see anything as tears rolled down my face. I had once seen her with most of her body covered in third-degree burns. She would get through this, I was sure of it. Oh, sweet Celestia, there was so much blood. It was still spurting out of her, and I pushed my hoof to the wound on the back of her head. It didn't meet any bone at all. As I turned her head a bit, I could see that I was actually touching her brain. My bullet had ripped off most of the back of her head. What was left of her beautiful orange mane was now dirty with blood. I cried hard and was more than surprised as Dancing opened her one good eye to smile at me. Even though everything was blurry, I could tell that her eye wasn't seeing anything. It was only pointed into my general direction. The changelings didn't attack me. They couldn't. I was manipulating the heat shield to be hotter on the outer perimeter, so they could not approach me without risking serious burns. I held her in her last moments. Dancing didn't say a single word, and her gaze did not hold a single ounce of hatred towards me. All I could make out in her expression was deep joy. Then her eye broke and her ragged breathing stopped. I don't know how long I sat there after her body had shimmered out of existence, returning to her own time period to be found shot dead in some alley before my tears dried up. The hollow feeling inside of me suddenly ignited as if Celestia herself had summoned a sun in my body. Screaming, I put every ounce of strength that I had into the shield. Die, 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 die! I screamed at the top of my lungs as I jumped back out, striking at every changeling I saw. Hundreds of them were incinerated the moment I had jumped out of the building, and more followed. I had only 2 swords left. I had to kill all of them, and I had to find Broken Cross. Dancing's wings had been open as I held her in my hoofs, and her cross was not there. That could only mean that Broken had stolen it and had deceived me. She had tricked me into killing the only one of us cross-bearers who was still on my side, and I was determined to make her pay for it. "4 weeks had passed since I had been in Baltimare. I hadn't found Broken anywhere, so I could only assume that we were now equally matched again. 2 crosses each. Sweet Hoof had obeyed my orders and had brought Sweet Potato back to Canterlot, directing the freshly returned agents to Baltimare to help me. According to what I had been told, she was pretty fierce about it, and even talked Barry down as the Pegasus had tried to tell her off for acting out of line. Of course, Barry could have outranked her outside of the NTY, but she had put herself under my command. The commando units they had sent to help me had found me unconscious in the street. There was not a single changeling left alive. I, however, had sustained serious injuries despite my heat shield. Both of my rear legs had been broken, my mane and tail had been singed away completely as I lost control of the heat. In addition to that, I had suffered some internal bleedings due to jumping out of 2 buildings. Today, the doctors had finally cleared me and I was allowed to have visitors. As soon as the door opened, a somber-looking sweet potato came in. Looking into her amber eyes reminded me so much of dancing that I broke out in tears again, hugging the little filly close to me. She endured it and patted my back with a hoof while I cried my heart out. It was then that I noticed a jingling sound. Looking up, I saw the key Dancing had once lost dangling from a chain that hung around my daughter's neck.